And in this episode of Connections, we will be talking about how our understanding of human behavior has always been influenced by the technologies that were occurring at the time. It's interesting how the innovation of technology has always kind of shaped the way that we tended to talk about human behavior. And this first part of our journey takes us to early on in the evolution of modern civilizations, when people moved from being hunter-gatherers to a shift into agriculture. And this is where our first metaphor for human behavior comes from. It was this idea that humans were created out of mud and clay and then given the breath of life by the gods. And you can see why. From the ground grew the plants that they survived off of, right? So here, life was literally given by the ground and put into existence. And farming is especially at that time, farming was very labor intensive and very tedious. It was really hard work. And an example can be seen with the use of their technology. This was literally a digging stick that they would use to try to turn the soil in order to make it easier to farm. But with the advancement and eventually development of the plow, they were able to do that same type of work in less time and do more of the work, which resulted in like surpluses of food, which they could then sell to markets. And with that, they were able to free up some more time for them to innovate, create new technologies. And one of the newest technology had to do with water. And this technology is the hydraulic systems. Hydraulic systems were powered by water, and this water created shifts within the internal mechanism. And the shifts inside the internal mechanism produce changes that could be observed, right? It's a technology. And two prominent theorists at the time, Rene Descartes and Hippocrates, both believed that there was liquids inside your body that were responsible for human behavior. Rene Descartes hypothesized that maybe animal spirits would travel within the body, causing behavior. And Hippocrates developed like the theory of humors, where we had all kinds of fluids that were responsible for human behavior. And then Francis Gleason took that idea to the test. He hypothesized that if we had different movements occurring within the body, then you would see a change in the volume if there was indeed a transfer of liquids across the body. But that is not what he observed. He saw that the volume of liquid stayed the same. And so this innovation in hydraulic engineering paved the way for actually a form of technology that was very popular at the time, so automatons. So in the background, you saw the same kind of hydraulic system that I showed you earlier. But however, on the outside to an observer, especially in that time, it looked like these robots were moving seamlessly through time and space. And this was very similar to what humans did. But with the innovation of technology, the metaphor started to switch from a hydraulic one to a mechanical one. So instead of hydraulic fluids moving around the body, it then shifted to gears and springs that powered the human behavior. And one of the biggest proponents of this idea was Thomas Hobbes, who famously thought that associations and ideas were a result of tiny mechanical movements happening within the body of a human, primarily in the head. And from here, we got another switch into Michael Faraday's time. He was a very big researcher in the area of electromagnetism, and he developed the Faraday disc, which was the first dynamo. And here, this dynamo converts mechanical energy, so the movement of the wheel, into electrical energy. And this shifts our metaphor from a mechanical one to an electrical one. But here is where it starts to get a little interesting, because it's not necessarily completely metaphorical, but there is metaphorical ties in the ways that these things were explained at times. And what I mean by this is that concurrently, there was also advancements in the field of physiology. And this was Luigi Galvani, a researcher who's very well known for his work with bioelectricity. One of his famous experiments involved the amputated legs of a frog, and whenever he had a electrically charged scalpel, he would touch somewhere on the frog's legs and cause a jump in the legs, right? So it was completely detached from the organism, but you still saw movement in the legs. So he wondered if human behavior was maybe caused by some kind of electricity. And again, the world of physiology started to really shape the way that we talked about human behavior. And by looking at this and the developments of electricity, we move on to the next metaphor used to talk about behavior. So this is Samuel Morse, one of the inventors of the electric telegraph. And with the telegraph, we now had a means to efficiently and effectively communicate across wide distances. And that was a really big breakthrough in the times. And then at the same time, or very similar times, we have this guy, Hermann von Helmholtz, who is credited for being one of the first researchers to systematically study neurons and nerve conduction. And this is where we get the next metaphor of human behavior being caused by a telegraph. And I think what they meant by that is that the nervous system and the neurons would transmit information from one end of the neuron to another neuron. And it was this communication that was responsible for the human behavior. And from here, we go back to this idea about communication and the telegraph. Well, this technology could be intercepted. And if we start talking about private messages, especially in times of war, well then we're gonna want to codify those messages. That way our enemies won't know what we're up to. And so that's exactly what the Germans do during World War II by developing the German Enigma. And this technology created a code in which they could send messages, and the Allied forces would have no idea what's going on. A part of the Allied forces created a special task force that was, their whole goal was to try to break that German Enigma. And at the time it seemed unbreakable, but a part of that team was a guy who was just, this is gonna be a understatement, but he was just a really smart guy. So not only was he one of the key contributors to breaking the German Enigma, but he was also exploring in the world of computation. So in a paper that he created while he was trying to figure out how to beat the German Enigma, he also started developing like a concept of an idea of something called the stored program computer. And in 1946, he designed the first real design blueprint for how such a mechanism could be constructed and how it would work. And this storage computer paved the way for today's computers. This was a proof of concept that was created at the University of Manchester, and it was called the baby. So it was more of a proof of concept and became what we now see in the modern computer. And again, at this time was whenever the next big metaphor, and I think the current metaphor for human behavior exists, where we started looking at the behavior caused by the brain, which worked like a computer. And a lot in the fields of psychology, and especially cognitive psychology, you start to see the use of this metaphor. I'm sure that they have other stuff going on, and I know that they may not really think that it's a computer, but the metaphor is always there. They always talk about it as if it is one. And then this takes us to the last part of our journey, which puts us in a place where we can begin to wonder what will potentially be the next metaphor to be used. after contemplation, I thought that a possible metaphor would be artificial intelligence. There has been a lot of talk on how, as computers get smarter, they seem to learn and be more and more like us humans. So maybe this is going to be a step in the evolution of the next metaphor that is used to explain behavior. But only time will tell as far as what happens and what metaphors become adopted by the world at large.